Hey, what's up everybody, Ultimate Spider-Man here, and today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man freshman year. Now, before I talk about the villains for this series, I'm going to be going over the origin for this Spider-Man in particular for the MCU. So let's get into the origin aspect, I guess, for this series. Now, I know we're all getting sick of the origin aspect for Spider-Man, like the origin story for him, since we've seen it so many times. But I think for this series in particular, the MCU could have a chance of having it be the most faithful Spider-Man origin story, and it being also faithful to the comics, like how they did the origin story for Spider-Man. I believe for this one, it'll be a mix between Ultimate and 616 version of the character. Since Oscorp does not exist yet in the MCU, Peter could go to the science exhibition, since you cannot do Oscorp because that is from the Ultimate comics, and Oscorp is related to how Peter even got his powers from, like the spider that bit him. Now, you can't do something like the science exhibition, since that is something the MCU can have the opportunity to take it from, like from Amazing Fantasy issue number 15. This is where the spider bit him, and like I said, the MCU could take this opportunity because the first Spider-Man Raimi movie was in a lab, like in a laboratory, and the Amazing Spider-Man 1 movie, that took place in Oscorp, like at a lab from Oscorp. And this is another moment where they could take inspiration from Amazing Fantasy issue number 15, where Peter touches something and it breaks. Like, that's when he discovered he has spider strength. You could take this as well from issue number 15 of Amazing Fantasy, because the MCU Spider-Man has a YouTube channel, so maybe he could be first appearing on YouTube. Like, that's how people came to know him. Now, as for the Ultimate version that they could inspire it off from, they could do something like he's in a food court, he's just minding his own business, just reading books, and then Flash Thompson could basically throw food at his books to make fun of him. And then Uncle Ben could come over and Peter would question, what is he doing here, right? Then Uncle Ben could explain himself, and then he would relax Peter and try to calm him down and give the strict look to Flash. Or Flash Thompson, he wouldn't really do something like this to Peter in the MCU, right? So I would just have it be like, oh, he's doing insults to Peter Parker or something like that. And then when Peter gets reckless, Uncle Ben could come over and basically, Uncle Ben could give him the "with great power comes great responsibility." And it will be something like the Ultimate comics, and I guess from the Amazing Spider-Man 1 movie. Now, before the whole YouTube thing, like the introduction to him on YouTube, I think Peter should be going to the wrestling contest first, like in both 616 and Ultimate comics, like being put into the MCU, where he could basically do it once and he'll win some money. But if he wants more money, then the talk show like TV thing happens, like where he could first appear on YouTube. Then we all know what happens next. Peter Parker became irresponsible by letting this thief go. Peter basically doesn't care, and that led to his uncle being killed. And once he found out who did it, Peter Parker learned that with great power comes great responsibility. You know, something like that. Okay, now that we got the origin story out of the way, now it's time for the villains that I think should be in the series. The first villain I think should be in the series is Chameleon. However, there's just one little problem with that. We see the Chameleon, but it's under his alter ego in Far From Home. But there is a way you can get around this, though. You see, the MCU has done this twice with two villains. It's both Mandarin and Taskmaster. What they have in common is that they're not the real villains. In Iron Man 3, you didn't see the real Mandarin. Or in the Black Widow movie, you didn't see the real Taskmaster. What I'm saying here is that maybe with the MCU here, they could do the same thing with the Chameleon. The second villain they should introduce in this series is the Rhino. Rhino is a lesser threat for Spider-Man. He's more so a small villain, which is something that this series needs, given that you're dealing with an inexperienced Spider-Man. So having the villain be Rhino in this case, it's pretty good, because then it can give Peter, well, some ideas of how to take down Rhino down. Also, it's something to consider. None of the MCU Spider-Man movies have ever mentioned about, well, him fighting the Rhino before. So him fighting off the Rhino, it could give him some, well, experience. Like, oh, he already knows how to fight the Rhino. The third villain that I'm iffy about is the Beetle. He's a villain that can fly in a suit of armor, which you don't want to do because then you'll fall into the trap of doing the same villain over again, especially since we already have a villain in Homecoming that does that already. The Vulture. But here's how I would go with this. I would go with the ultimate version, where essentially it's, you don't know who it is, and also, he's an agent. He's stealing something, like, some piece of armor or whatever it is for, his boss. In my view, this is at least how you should introduce him, but I don't think they'll introduce him in freshman year, as I've explained before. Now, as far as crime bosses like Silvermane, Hammerhead, hell, even Tombstone, I don't think they will appear in this series, because this takes place after his uncle's death, so I don't think it would be a good idea necessarily to, introduce them, if you will. Plus, this version of Spider-Man hasn't encountered one of the crime bosses yet. Also, on top of that, this Spider-Man is in his teenage years, so he hasn't quite gotten used to, his powers yet. Also, this would take place after Daredevil Season 1, where Kingpin is in jail. So yeah, not a good time to introduce a crime boss just yet. Well, these are the villains that I would choose for this series. So let me know down below in the comments which villains you guys would like to choose. I'm very curious. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.